pushing the button or am I?
We're live! Yay!
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of Woolly Wednesday with the Livestock Conservancy, where we talk about all things sheep. I'm your host, Cindra Kerscher, your programs and Shaving to Saving coordinator. Joining me today is our communications manager, Brittany Sweeney.
Hello.
And we're delighted to introduce to you our special guest today, Emily Chamelin-Hickman. Hi, Emily. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. I'm excited.
We are very excited. Yeah. So a little bit about Emily, and then I'll let her talk more about herself. But Emily is a farmer herself, a shepherdess. Actually, she's got a multi-species farm in Carroll County, Maryland, that she'll tell us a little bit more about. But along with her husband, Kevin, Emily runs Chamelin Shearing, and her farm is Airy Farm East. So tell us a little bit about your farm, Emily. What all you got going on up there?
Absolutely. So I'll work backwards. So currently we are farming. We have around 200 head of border Cheviot ewes, and these are old style border Cheviot. So they're not quite what you would see in a show ring these days. They tend to be a little smaller, but that's the bulk of our operation is our Cheviot flock. We also have a small herd of mini zebu cattle, which we run with them as like pseudo guardians. And we also have a goat flock as well. That we use for diversity to manage the brush in certain areas. So that's our farm operation. We really are trying to do intensive grazing, rotational grazing, all the, hot words at the moment. We really focus on regenerative stuff and trying to improve our soil with the sheep. We just had our first lamb drop. So we are right on the cusp of lamb. In the next couple of weeks, we'll have a lot of lambs. So if you want lamb pictures, go over and look at our farm page. But the farm has only happened because of our shearing adventures. And I've been shearing for over 20 years. My husband, Kevin, he's been shearing for a lot longer than that. Between us, we have quite a bit of experience on the shearing. And I learned, like I said, it's been about 20 years now. I went to the Maryland Shearing School, was my first learning experience. Taught me just enough to be dangerous. Started to go out and shear for some friends, and that kind of snowballed. Since then, I've been to other shearing schools around the United States. There's a couple in South Dakota. Did that one. Iowa has one. There's several that I've been to, and then I started doing shearing competitions. Once I decided I really wanted to do this and do it right, did some shearing competitions. That snowballed into doing a stint overseas. I sheared in New Zealand for a season. That was an incredible experience. And then off of that as well, I've participated in, I think, 3 world championships at this point. So I've been to New Zealand, I've been to Ireland, I've been to Scotland. So a lot of experience. Seen a lot of different types of sheep, worked at a lot of different levels. But our business right now, we focus primarily on the Mid-Atlantic region. We cover all of Maryland, all of Delaware, most of Northern Virginia. And by Northern Virginia, I mean from Charlottesville, Stanton, north. We do a little bit of West Virginia and a little bit of Southern Pennsylvania. We also dabble in New Jersey as well. But we show up for one sheep, and we show up for a lot of sheep. So we really don't have any cutoffs. We go and we get the job done. That's our motto. So, I don't know if you want to start asking questions or you want me to just kind of keep going along the lines of what we had outlined.
Well, let me just interject real quick and say that was a fabulous background. Thank you. We get a lot of people on here and people will start talking, but that was succinct and well-rounded.
Yeah,
Thank you for that. So I just want to give a shout out to everybody that's watching. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you are watching live, feel free to, Brittany says, hey, thank you. Feel free to, if you have any questions for Emily along the way, post them, in the Facebook discussion there. They will come through to us and we'll interject those where we can. If you were watching this after the fact, thank you for that as well. And feel free to ask any questions. If there's anything that we can answer, the Livestock Conservancy staff, we will go ahead and do that. If you have questions and you're watching this after the fact, please email Emily directly or get in touch with her through Facebook, Instagram pages, her farm, or her business website. All right. Yes. And a couple people to say hello to already. Jean Ludeni has already shouted out. Hello, Jean. Thanks for joining us. And Melissa Weaver Dunning. She's in our sweater challenge as well. Thank you so much, Melissa, for watching today. All right. So let's get to questions. Yeah. So I want to know a little bit more about your shearing business. You've said kind of what your territory is, but I'm super curious. How many sheep do you think you shear in a shearing season or per month? I know it's got to be a big number.
It's a few. So back when I was keeping track very regularly, and this was probably pre-COVID, COVID has like obviously shifted much of our lives. Pre-COVID, when the world made sense, we were doing about 5,000 a year. Was roughly the number that we hit at fairly regularly. With the addition of the farm, I'm staying home a little bit more, so I'm probably not doing quite that many. My husband probably is still shearing that many, maybe more. But that's usually about where we hang.
That's a lot of sheep.
Yeah, that's a few.
Wow. And what does that season run roughly month to month? Is it like a 3/4 month season? Is it a 6-month season? What's that like for you?
People can shear year round. There is always what my goal is to shear when the wool is ready. So that can be pretty much any time year round. But the primary season does run pretty much from early February to about the beginning of July is the prime season. And then your like super crazy months are like end of March and April. Like everybody wants end of March and April.
Yeah. So that fascinates me right there and leads me to another question, because I thought a lot of folks were lambing in January, February. So does that mean that some folks are lambing later, or they're waiting till after lambing to shear?
Both. There is a demographic of people that just don't want to shear them before they lamb, and that's awesome. We do tend to try to push people to shear pre-lamb when you're talking about wool quality, which we'll get into more here in a little bit. But if you shear pre-lamb and you're bringing them into a barn, your wool will be pristine. Once they go in that barn and they start rolling around in the hay, you will see reduced quality. Most people here in the mid-Atlantic, especially small flock guys, they tend to lamb a little bit later. March is kind of a key time. April, we see like most of the hobbyists tend to shear or lamb in April, so they want to shear in March. But your January, February lambers tend to be more of your production guys that are really trying to get them out and get them ready for the Easter market.
Yeah. Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong on this, but shearing pre-lambing also helps avoid any breaks in that fiber, correct?
Yes. So you are hitting they get, because most of the lamb growth happens in that last month. And then as soon as they lamb, so much of their nutrient requirement goes towards making milk. So you do see a definite nutritional weakness there in the wool, because they will only produce wool when there is a surplus of nutrients that is available to produce it. So you end up with this weird soft spot in the fleece. So if you shear them right before they lamb, you avoid all of that, because if there's a weak tip as it grows out right after they lamb, you practically don't, it just disappears. It's gone.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, let's talk about fleece types. So we know from Shaven to Save 'em that we've got lots of different types of fleece on lambs. We've got our down breeds, our dual coated breeds, our long wool breeds. We've even got hair sheep, and then there's crosses. So talk a little bit about, first of all, do you shear all those different types of coats? And then if you do, are there any differences between the two in how you work and what you need, or the time of year that you do it, all that good stuff?
Yeah, no, we shear most of, I think the only breed that I don't think I've sheared a legit representative of the breed is the Oxford.
Okay.
Probably, I know there's some up in New York, but I don't think I've sheared any of them. But I think that's the only breed on the list that I haven't been able to get a hold of. But yes, and lots of variety. The down breeds are what you would normally see with your 4-H show lambs. They are representative of your like Tunis types on the rare breeds. Gulf Coast kind of have a bit of a medium breed wool. So that type of fleece because of how dense it is on the skin and dense in terms of follicles per square inch, that wool tends to not have too many problems. You can pretty much shear that anytime, year round. It doesn't get any sort of nuance to it. Those breeds tend to stay pretty reliable no matter when you shear them. You go down the list if you're getting into the dual coateds. Dual coateds, because of the nature of that guard hair, which is more of a throwback to being a hair animal, so that it does tend to act like they want to shed, or they have this sort of memory of shedding, and they try to do that in the spring. So the dual coated breeds do tend to have sort of a tricky time frame. There again, I'm on the East Coast, so ours tends to be sometime in March. You'll get a couple warm days or a warm day, and that's all it takes to trigger it. And some of those dual coats are nearly impossible to shear in March or early April, because once that they call it the rise, once that hits the skin, or if there's stress in the animal, which tends to coincide with lambing as well. So that is sort of the double whammy with the dual coats. But once that hits the skin, it's best to just wait till that lifts off. And it kind of takes about a month or so to lift off the skin so you can safely shear it. Shetlands are notorious for that. There are some, fine wool Shetlands that avoid that. They've bred out most of the guard hair. But any of the breeds with like a hardcore guard hair, they're awful for that. So forgive your shearer if they don't want to shear right around when a normal shed period would be, because that's why they are like, this is not a good idea. Don't do it. Don't do it. You can also shear them before all of that happens. Like I try to do as many of them as possible in February, which is a cold month. It's not ideal. But you do end up catching it before. The problem with that is that if you catch them too early, then you end up with just a little bit on the tip, and if it's enough, it'll felt to the surface of the incoming fleece, so you can have problems with that as well. So just something to think about. When you're talking about hair sheep, you do have to let that lift, and it's really tricky, because once it releases and they shed, you have to collect it then. Otherwise you have all of that hair in there, which ruins the quality of the wool. If any of you have attempted to spin the hair breeds, I know there are people out there doing that. That guard hair doesn't take, or that legit true hair doesn't take dye. And that's why it's a contaminant in the commercial wool realm. They really don't like it. So just something to think about. What you're going for is that undercoat, like on a dog, that lifts out. So but then if we talk about long wools, again, long wools are forgiving like the medium wools. The problem with long wools being they grow so fast and they get so long. So a lot of people try to play around with like an 8-month schedule on them, which has its pluses and minuses, because then you're always not quite lined up to your lambing schedule. So you have issues there. But long wools, easy to shear. It just falls right off of them. It's like butter. It's just gone. They're fun to shear if they sit for you, because they tend to be big.
Yeah. So little known fact, we haven't talked about this. A couple of years ago, I got wise in the sarcastic manner, and took a shearing workshop with the North Carolina sheep producers. And holy moly, you guys, if you've never done this, and I know most of us probably haven't, kudos to you, Emily, because this is not for the faint of heart. This is like, you got to be a powerful person, and I know you are. This was not an easy thing to do.
Strong back, weak mind. Just be able to turn it off and just forget about the pain.
And be in charge of that animal. Yeah. So kudos to you. So I had a question about here, let's just go into that. So we're talking about shearing. Let's talk about, because I know this is near and dear to your heart, and we're coming up on it right now. Let's talk about prerequisites. If you've got a client scheduled, what do you want them to do in preparation for shearing? And if you are not their shearer, what do you suggest to make their own shearer happy that they should do?
Yes. Okay. So here we go. I apologize ahead of time. First off, Shearers want to shear on a piece of plywood. That is the number one thing. A lot of people, especially if you only have a few sheep, try to like cut corners and they put down like poly tarps. I don't know if you've ever worn wool socks and tried to walk or run across a poly tarp. It usually ends badly. You should attempt it first, and then you'll agree with me that plywood is awesome. Like, just find a piece of plywood. You know, I have a lot of people that just buy one. Right now, plywood is super expensive. So I have some sheer guilt about that, because it's like I'm asking you to buy a piece of plywood, which is probably your entire year's budget. But it is so much more forgiving on the equipment, on the animal. It has good grip. Really, that is what we want to shear on, is a nice solid piece of plywood. You can keep it clean. Particle board is not ideal because the way the chips are, wool will get stuck and it's really hard to sweep. Some people find that plywood that has sort of a shiny skim to it. Obviously, anything that's shiny is slippery, and you add sort of grease to it, makes it worse. We want just your standard run-of-the-mill piece of plywood. It is the right size. Don't cut it down. I mean, that is what we want. You can screw it to the wall of your barn for an entire year and then take it down at shearing. Actually, we like it if there's sort of a residue on it, because it does help, you know, your shoes grip a little bit better. But plywood is number one. Number two, the fasting issue. So taking sheep off of food and water. And I get so much pushback on this. But what I'm saying is proven through research. It has been proven through years and years of people shearing. You absolutely must take your sheep off of food, all food. Anything that goes in their mouth is food. Grass is food, grain is food, hay is food. What we're trying to accomplish is that there are 4 stomachs in a sheep. And so when they eat, it goes into the first stomach, then they regurgitate it, they chew, it goes into the second stomach, and then it works its way through all these stomachs. This takes a lot of time, and hay especially is very dense and fibrous. I don't know if any of you have butchered your own sheep, but when you process an animal, even if you've had them off of food for a substantial amount of time overnight, when you process that animal, the stomach is huge. It's huge. And what I want you to understand is the reason we ask for this is that stomach with all of its contents, when you sit the animal up and push them forward, that stomach will put pressure on the heart and lungs. And in any animal with any issues, they are going to struggle because they literally cannot breathe, and it's putting stress on the heart. You will have issues in hot weather with this. You'll have, like, sheep can die if not properly fasted. This is a thing, it gets worse in the hot weather. So as soon as we see hot temperatures, that's usually when we have one of these occur. We are trying to keep your sheep as safe as possible. And by taking the pressure out of the stomach and off of the heart and lungs, it is amazing how well they just sit. They just sit. They, like, if you have temperamental sheep that do the leg stomping, or they're getting away from the shearer, you need to fast them a couple more hours. And this is where it comes back to, like, the nuance of this. People are breeding sheep bigger, especially the long wools. The long wools are enormous. Lincolns are enormous now. Wensleydales are really enormous. Like, if your sheep weigh more than your shearer, you need to fast them longer. Rams just need to be fasted for 24 hours. There's absolutely no reason that a 24-hour fast is going to hurt a ram. They're not producing anything. They're not gestating. They're not doing all the things. They can take a 24-hour fast. And most of the times rams have a little bit of attitude anyway. And that just knocks the edge off of them. I mean, really, a high-strung ram will just sort of melt into you if you do a true 24-hour no food. When we talk about water's a little more nuanced, and I understand people get really worked up about it. But you will have some sheep that will get bored and they will just go over to the water and drink water and drink water and drink water because they're just used to eating constantly. And so they replace that with water. And so what happens is you roll them over and you can almost hear the ocean in them. They're so full of water. So you need to take the water out, several hours before. I always say at least 2 hours to sort of, because water will pass through them quicker. Obviously, anybody that's drank a cup of coffee, water goes through you quicker. The hay needs to be pulled At least 12 hours. You want at least overnight. If you have big sheep, 18 hours is good. If you still have struggling with your shearer, push them closer to 24. And this also lines up with scheduling at an appropriate time frame ahead of lambing. A lot of people have concerns. They don't want to limit them while they're gestating. I get that. But if your sheep are struggling and the shearer has to hold them down for an additional, 3 to 5 minutes because your sheep are struggling, that's also causing a lot more stress and a lot more potential damage to that fetus than if they were just fasted. Because there is residual food still moving through the digestive tract. I know you don't think it, but they are still pooping. Like, they will poop for 24 hours. And I can always tell because they'll poop on the board if you haven't taken the food away, with plenty of time. And the same for water. Now, obviously, if it's, 100 degrees at the end of June, early July, you got to mitigate that. But what I tell people is you can put a tiny little 5-gallon bucket out there. And if they drink it down and it disappears, you can fill it back up. And you can put another little tiny, they don't have to have unlimited access to this. I know that, they're your babies, and I get that. And we want to treat them like your babies. But if they are trying to kill us, it's really hard to do that. So small limits make for a very much more enjoyable shearing experience. And that's what your shearer is trying to get across to you. Like, I want your sheep to just sit so that I can shear them as quickly and easily as possible. And they're not flailing around, and I have to let them up because they might be stressing. If they're empty, they will sit. And it's always amazing. But if you finally get through to somebody and they do it and they actually fast them appropriately, they're like, man, night and day. It is night and day. They will just sit. So that's what we want. And I don't want it just for me. I want it for your sheep. That is ultimately what it's for. It's for the sheep. I want this to be fast and easy, and everybody's happy, and the fleece comes off so nice. It's beautiful. But if your sheep are still pooping on the board, you need to, add an extra 2 or 3 hours the next year. You will find that perfect number for your sheep, and it's different for everyone because they're different sizes. But that is the second most important thing. So piece of plywood, empty out your sheep. The third thing is they absolutely have to be dry. They have to be dry. This is non-negotiable. We are using an electrical appliance on an animal. You would not dry your hair in the bathtub. It is a bad idea. Like, let's just be smart here. The other thing is, it is nearly impossible. And I've seen people attempt to do this. It ends badly. It is nearly impossible to dry wool once it's off the sheep. Like, it is a nightmare. It is a nightmare. I know there's probably some people listening that have attempted it. Varying degrees of success. It just is weird. It ends up weird. Don't do it. Just have them be dry before you shear them. Because the other thing is, and this is about me, I have to cling to that animal and then wear whatever is on it all day long. If it's wet, I will get wet, and I will be wet all day long. Now, I will be fine if I can hose you down with a hose, and then we both are wet. If we're both wet, we're both on the same team, I'm fine with that. Like, I'm on team, we're both suffering together. But the problem is that you can usually go change right away, and I can't. So they have to be dry. That includes dew. People, they never think of dew. They leave them out that morning. They're still on pasture. So number one, you're breaking the food rule. Number two, they're dew damp. And then they bring them in and they're wet. There's that surface wetness. So dew counts if you're going to have rain for multiple days. And this is a very real thing in March and April. We get a lot of rain. If it's going to rain for 3 days and that's in the forecast, you need to lock them up 4 days in advance. You need to lock them up dry. They will not dry in a barn. They just don't. Really? And so when you're talking about nuance of drying sheep, I usually say if the road is dry, the sheep are dry. So if you have enough sunlight and breeze to dry the road, usually the sheep are dry. So if you turn them back out and the road dries out, you know that the sheep are probably dry enough to put back in the barn. So that's kind of my rule of thumb. But if they're in tall grass and they're running around in tall, wet grass, they will stay wet longer. So that sort of needs to be taken into consideration. But people let them get rained on and then put them right in the barn, and they will just stay damp wet the entire time unless they see sunshine and or wind. So keep that in mind when you're planning your shearing day. Again, people don't like locking them up for long periods of time. They don't like keeping them off feed. But this is once a year. They will forgive you. I promise you they will forgive you for this. And your shearer will love you so much more for doing this. Lock them up before the rain. Keep them off feed. Plywood. Those are the main three things. The other things is you need to provide a broom with a handle. You have no idea how many times I've been to farms where it's just the bottom part of the broom, or they can't find the broom, or it's like an 18-foot push broom, which is not helpful. Have like one good legit broom. Have your own bags and have your people ready to help. Like if you have decided that this is the day you want to do all the things, that's fine. But don't count on your shearer and don't ask your shearer to have to do all the things while you're there. Now, some shearers are happy doing that. That's awesome. You need to have that agreed upon before the shearer shows up. But like if your goal is to do all the things, you better have all the people there to help. I mean, that's just common courtesy.
Emily, when you say all the things, which things are you referring to?
So that is foot trimming, vaccinating, worming. You know, again, I've been doing this a long time. The longer I do that, the more I hate doing those things. Number one, when you're vaccinating and worming in conjunction with the stress of shearing, you will see more incidences of, people get, rushed. You dose them wrong. I've had sheep die while I'm there because they dosed them wrong with the wrong wormer. If you're giving vaccines and wormer at the same time, if you do have an animal that has an anaphylactic reaction to one of them, you waste a lot of time trying to figure out what caused the problem. And a lot of times you'll lose those animals. Now, it doesn't happen a lot, but it can happen. And when you're the shearer standing there going, I don't know, we gave them 4 things. I have no idea what's causing the issue. That really ruins a day. And it's a little triggering. But I mean, it is something to keep in mind. These things do happen. And there's a reason why most shearers don't like doing these things. Although if you have a shearer that wants to do it, that's fine. You as the owner need to be prepared for that contingency. Foot trimming. For the fleece people in this group, foot trimming in conjunction with shearing is an absolutely awful idea. Don't do it. You will end up with toenails in your wool, and your processor will hate you for it because it damages a lot of equipment. Plus, it's something, if you're skirting correctly, you have to go through and get the toenails out. It is just a contaminant. The other issue is, when you're trimming feet, you will inevitably get one that probably bleeds a little. If you are not capable of handling that mentally, don't ask your shearer to do that because it's just something that happens. Obviously, nobody does it on purpose. It's not something they maliciously go out to do. It's just something that happens. You will end up with blood in your wool or on your shearing surface, which needs to be cleaned up prior to the next one. So these things seem minor, but when they happen over and over and over again, it becomes something that just, it is a husbandry thing that you as an owner should be responsible for. It's not that difficult to learn. It is just something that you should take responsibility for, and you should be handling your sheep more than once a year anyway. So, I always like to tell people you're locking them up for at least 24 hours prior to shearing. You have an entire day you can trim feet, and you can get your hands on your animals and get all of the information that I get when I'm handling your animal. And then once we're done shearing, they can go right to eating and they can go right to freedom versus I'm going to shear them and then I'm going to pass them to the next guy who's going to foot trim them. And then you're going to shoot them with this, that, and the other. Like, it's just a lot all at once. Trying to give them little bitty stresses and then being able to turn them loose is so much better for them, I think. But, that's, again, agree with these things before your shearer comes and make sure that everybody's on the same page in regards to those things.
Perfect. Were you about to add something else?
I don't know. I was trying to think if I missed anything. I mean, I will add one more thing. Yeah. It's on my shearing survey. Timing your shearing around your lambing is really important. I have become almost militant about this. I do not people want to wait until either the day before they lamb or as soon as the lambs drop, like as soon as they're on the ground, that first week after, they want shearing done. That is such a terrible, terrible time to shear. And I'm going to explain. Your shearer might shear for you then, and that's fine. If your shearer is okay with doing that, kudos to them, but I'm going to promise you that they're working twice as hard as they need to be working. I never want to shear for somebody if their lambs are less than a month old. And the reason for that is if you have ewes in jugs, which a lot of people put them in little pens and do it, it is so much more work, and it's so much more screaming, and it's so much more stress on the animals, the mother and the baby. So then you have like, you know, the neighbor comes and they hold the babies right over you while you're shearing, and they're screaming in your head, and the mother's screaming because she can't see her baby. Like, why would you do that to them? Like, don't do that to them. If they are so young that they're in a jug, you should not be shearing. And if you timed it badly that they are lambing, you know, you really need to plan better for the next year. For a lot of people, it's just, you know, we'll just bring them to you one at a time out of the jug. But it is so much more stressful for that animal. And it's just unnecessary stress. I like to tell people, aim for a month before your first lamb. If you run your rams with your ewes year round, I'm fairly certain you have a rough idea of when they will start. And you probably need to add a week or two in front of that. Because typically they will start breeding right after July 1st. I mean, that tends to be, you know, so if you're shearing in early December, you're probably going to miss most of them. But again, I mean, I have some people that run them year round and they don't start lambing until the 1st of March, which, you know, if they know that, then aim for, you know, the last week of January, first week of February. But that is your sweet spot. The most lamb growth happens in that last month. So you are catching them right before they really take off. You're going to have to start feeding them anyway, like the extra nutrition to help grow that lamb. So as soon as you take that wool off, you're going to have to feed them too, because you need to replace the calories that they might be cold. So those all coincide perfectly. Like, just shear them at that month before. The other thing is, if you wait too long, you know, that lamb takes up a lot, and it's the same principle as the stomach. And the worst part about that is if you have huge lambs and you don't fast them out, like that, you can't even bend them. You cannot bend them. It's this weird pseudo pattern that you have to do. And, you know, if you have a lot of sheep, it just adds so much time, and it physically hurts your shear. Like, the shear kind of gets to a point where they can shear, they can stay bent over for a certain amount of time. And if you add to that even 30 seconds and a minute to each sheep, by the end of the day, they're really going to be hurting. So, you know, aim for that month before. If you can't do that, aim for a month after your last lamb comes. And if you left the rams in and you think they're going to be strung out, then, you know, wait till your last lamb drops and then call your shearer. A lot of people, I get a lot of pushback on that, but I've seen lambs stomped because ewes were stressed and they were, you know, running around, and lambs got stepped on and your legs broken. Like, there's a reason we ask for these things, because I just want to avoid any possible drama that can negatively impact your flock. Like, ewes get stressed, lambs get hurt, anaphylactic shock. Like, I've seen all of it, and I don't want any of it. Like, I want it to be easy, and I want it to be happy, and I want beautiful wool. And, you know, the more of these rules you follow, the better all of this goes. So
this is such great advice, Emily. Thank you so much. I'm going to interject with a couple of comments and questions that have been coming through while you're talking. First of all, I want to say hello to Annette Beechler. Annette says, "We trust you, Emily. You have always been wonderful."
I love you, Annette.
Annette also says, "Clear bags are best. Mark each bag with the corresponding ear tag." Very smart. Let's see. Kathy Bermania is here. Hi, Kathy. She says, asks, how can we keep them clean on cement barn floor? Straw makes a mess, manure makes a mess.
So my answer to that is, you need to bring them in for like a week ahead of time and overnight them in that barn. You want the straw to be wet. Like, the biggest thing that I've seen that people ruin their wool in like the last 5 minutes before shearing is putting down fresh straw. That stuff sticks to them like Velcro. You will ruin an entire clip by throwing down fresh bedding. You want that bedding dirty enough that it stays down. So you want them like at least a week before, peeing on it, making it stick to the ground. I mean, you don't want it filthy, obviously, but you want them to have been on it enough that it stays where it belongs. So that's my advice to her. Now, again, if you're running them in a barn, I have a couple people that will run them in on concrete. You need to pre-fast them outside, because that's the other thing. They will unload and it will be a slurry. Like, it is amazing how much stuff is in their guts. So if you have a dry lot or a small area, you can lock them in before bringing them in, where they, if you put them in, even if there's grass out there, if you put them in a small enough spot where they eat the grass and then they've stepped on it and so they don't really want to eat it. I mean, they might pick at it, but they don't really want to eat it. That's ideal. Let them empty out on that grass. Don't give them anything else to eat or drink out on that grass. And then, if you do that ahead of time, so I would start that 24 hours before the 12-hour fast. So if you do that 24 hours before, they'll finish eating the grass. They'll kind of empty out outside where it drains, and then bring them into your concrete floor with bedding that has been at least peed on a little bit so it stays down. Then it'll stay much drier. The biggest mistake you can do is bring them in full into a not porous, surface. It'll be a pond. It'll be awful. I've seen that play out several times. It's disgusting.
And nobody wants to clean that wool.
Oh, Lord, no. And I feel so bad because they're following your rules. But again, the nuance is you want to get as much of that out before you bring them in to your barn, which doesn't have that sort of ability to absorb that. So something to think about.
Yeah, that was a great question, Kathy. Thank you so much for asking that. So Mary Jean Packer of Bat and Kill Fiber and Spinning Mill is with us today. Hi, Mary Jean. And she's going to second a couple of your comments here. She says drying wet wool after shearing is not a good idea. Fiber can mildew very quickly, and we can't get that out during processing.
Oh, that's bad.
Yeah, that's good to know. Also, she says, farmers, please do basic fiber sort and remove head, belly, and bridge wool and all tags before you ever put wool in the bag. And I think we might talk a little bit more about that in a bit. And yes, please, toenail removal. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's awful. I've talked to several mill owners, and they say like a toenail going through that they missed will ruin their equipment. So is it worth it for the convenience factor of having somebody who can physically move the animals for you on shearing day? Yes, but again, I like to come back to, you need to handle those animals more than once a year. There's a large demographic of our sheep owners who do not want to, and I don't know if it's do not want, they don't feel like they're physically capable of doing it. We own sheep because they're physically sized appropriately for us. It is doable. I'm not some sort of exceptional he-woman strong person. I have physically learned how to do it in a manner that can work for me. It is possible for people to learn how to do this. I want to empower farmers, men or women, to get out there and learn how to take care of feet. Because once you're actually doing it and you own that responsibility, you just can make so much better decisions. But if you rely on having an outside person come in and do all of the things for you, you really do lose that connection to your flock. I mean, you can look at them out in the field and they look good, but get your hands on them and handle them and learn how to, check FAMACHA scores and do the worming and the vaccinations, on your own time, and learn how to maintain, the feet on the sheep so that you know what's going on with your flock. Like, I can't emphasize that enough.
It's super important to be out there with eyes on them daily, even if not hands on them daily. I mean, I know that there are people who are running several hundred that just can't touch every sheep every day. And I get that. But, if you're bringing them into the barn 24 hours ahead of 12 to 24 hours ahead of time, that is the perfect time to clip and check FAMACHA scores.
Yep.
And the great thing is all of our states have the extension departments, that offer, a lot of them, probably most of them, offer free or very inexpensive classes on how to do FAMACHA, how to trim nails, how to sit your sheep down. It's not necessarily, intuitive. You need to know how to do it.
Don't let that intimidate you. Like, I want to empower people to be able to do it themselves. Like, even the big ones, there is a technique to it. You just
Oh, we lost your voice.
Once you get it figured out, it's all good.
Yeah. All right, let's see what else we got here in chat wise. Mary Jean also says wool quality will be much better if you shear before lambing. Yep.
Much better. Like once they lamb and they get that stress line, you will see more yellowing. You'll see so much more just dirt embedded in the fleece. It's amazing how it loses eye appeal. Like when you're shearing a fleece, you can judge how quickly it will sell based off of how much you kind of go, ooh, like, oh, wow. Like those will sell. You're shearing one and nobody does that. That's probably going to be a harder one to sell. Like some just they catch your eye. They're shiny. They open up. They're just beautiful. But after they lamb, you lose a lot of that eye appeal. And that's what helps sell a lot of fleeces.
And sell for a higher value.
Yeah, that's for sure.
What you want. Yeah. All right, let's see. Philip Simmons. Hi, Philip. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey.
Phil says, as a beginning sheep shearer, what's a good number goal to get done in a day? And what's a good time to get shearing? Oh, a goal time to get each shearing down to?
I think it's very fair to assume that you can get it down to 10 minutes as a beginner. The rule of thumb is you don't know how to shear until you've done 1,000 sheep. And trust me, it is amazing. You'll be slogging away on the little jobs and you've done a couple hundred and it still isn't clicking. As soon as you hit 1,000, it's like, whoa, like suddenly it's easier. So you either need to go somewhere where you can get more done quickly, which if you need those type of resources, I have them. I'm always happy to help guys find spots on crews. There's definitely crews where you can even go out for shorter periods of time and get that experience. But if you can keep it at less than 10 minutes, you're doing pretty good. And that is a very reasonable, time frame to kind of aim for. Good number to get done in a day. So you have to build your fitness. And if you can shear from 8 o'clock to lunchtime, if you're shearing for shorter periods of time than that, you're probably not building fitness. I will say the only reason that I truly was probably able to stick with it and become a shearer that I am is that I went to a job. It was one of my first jobs. The guy had 150 sheep. He said, I don't care what they look like. I want their faces and their butts clean, which was awesome because he was very forgiving. But he also was one of these old school farmers that was like, he had everything ready to go. He had a beautiful chute. The next sheep was always there. And I felt so guilty of stopping and taking breaks. Like, he's ready to go. We're going to shear until lunchtime. And I sheared until lunchtime. And I joke to this day, like, I would be sweating, but half of it would be tears. Like, you will hurt so bad. But if you can't work over that hump, then it's just going to take so much longer. So if you can just slog away for a good solid morning. Now, I don't recommend people go if they feel like their muscle, like, because you can literally like lift to the point of your muscles fail you. And that does happen with shearing as well. I see that, with learners. But most people should be able to put in, a 2-hour run and then take maybe a half hour, an hour break, and then another 2-hour run. You really need to get to the point where you can shear nonstop for that amount of time. You'll see yourself improve so much faster. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, great answers and great question. Thank you, Philip, for watching and for asking that. And Nets chimes back in. She says, we use... Oh. Hands off. Sorry, Brittany and I are both trying to do the same thing at the same time and cancel each other out. Well, all right. So Ned said, we use a sheep sling for foot trims.
Yes, there's tools out there. There are people that just won't trim feet, and that's fine. But I always let's do it in the fall let's do it at a different time. Let's make a separate appointment to trim feet versus, doing it all on one day is just a lot of stress for the sheep. It's so much stress for them. And, people just want to keep it simple. And I'm there too. Like, we crutched our sheep, and I said to my husband, I'm like, because he was doing the crutching. I pay somebody to do my shearing. I said to Kevin, Kevin, we're going to give a CDT shot. And he got so mad. Like, literally, we'll do it. But it just complicates things enough in your brain as a shearer because you want to just shear. It ruins the rhythm doing all that other stuff. You can do it ahead of time, and then your shearer will be so much happier to not have to do that. So I'm right there with y'all. I need to break the habit as well. We all need to break the habit, and it's a painful Band-Aid to pull off, but it needs to be done.
Philip said, "Thank you, Emily. That helps a lot."
Good. No problem. Good luck. It is not easy. It is not easy learning to shear. Right now, like, the sheep keep getting bigger. It's hard to find good schools. It's hard to find, reliable mentors, but they are out there. And I'm happy to help, throw resources your way if you need any more assistance.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. That's awesome. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about today, with Shave 'em to Save 'em, we've got a ton of fiber artists buying actual fleeces. Maybe they were out looking for yarn before, they've started spinning. Now they want to get into processing fleece. Let's talk about fleece quality. Because we do have some farmers who pay professional shearers, and we also have some farmers that will shear themselves. And I know that sometimes, I'm not saying that everyone who self-shears, has a lower quality fleece for sale than someone who is selling a professionally shorn fleece. But sometimes that actually does come up, and I've seen it at festivals. I've gone and opened a bag, and I've looked at it, and I've thought, this is absolutely gorgeous. And I made the mistake of not taking it all the way out of the bag. And I got home and I took it out of the bag, and it was full of second cuts. And I was like, man, I might not have paid what I paid had I actually taken it all the way out of the bag. So let's talk about that.
Well, let's talk about what defines a good fleece. So a good fleece is, you want one cut of the fiber, and you want all of those fibers in the bag to be as uniform as possible. And when I say uniform, I mean the quality of the crimp, the definition of the crimp, and the length of that actual fiber. That is the goal when you're selling fleece. Uniformity of all the things, uniformity of length, uniformity of quality. So what that means is, when you are doing your skirting, for anybody out there who doesn't know, that is picking off any of the inferior parts of the wool or anything that does not match that definition of what you want everything to match. So let's start off with the basics. Your best wool is center of the back shoulder. You have that shoulder area, that tends to be your best primo fleece. From there, as it goes down, you will see some lower quality wool. It tends to get shorter as it goes down around the legs or in the belly. As it goes towards the back, as you get into the hips, she mentioned the word britch, which is that lower back leg area. You end up with a lot more hair in that. You end up with a lot more, like, just because they lay down on one hip or the other, you end up with a lot more, it's coarser, it's been rubbed. You end up with some more hay or straw in that. So that is a lower quality area. The belly wool, I call that the pajamas. They've been sleeping on it all year long. You do not include the pajamas in your quality wool. Throw that stuff away. So that's sort of our guideline. What we want is basically like a horse blanket, the blanket of the sheep, just your primo stuff. So what you should do is you should look at that shoulder, right up on top wool, because that's your best. And you want to put as much of the fleece that matches that shoulder wool in the bag as possible. But if you start seeing length differences, you should pull that stuff out. So as you get closer to leg, it might still be pretty, but it's shorter. Pull that out. You want to keep it all as uniform as possible. The mill people will thank you for this. They really don't like it when there's a lot of variation, because what happens is when you put that through the mill, these shorter bits will get pulled out. So number one, you're paying to take it in, and then the mill equipment will pull it out, or it will end up in your yarn as a nib or something, and you'll lose it anyway. Like, you'll have a lower quality yarn because of that. Uniformity, everything in the bag needs to be the same. So when it comes down to shearing, having a high quality shearer who can do a nice uniform job, not go like if they're shearing, there are certain parts specifically around like the elbow, some of the leg, you'll end up where there's like dips and stuff where if the animal moves, you might come off the skin a bit. They can go back and clean those up, but they should absolutely not be included in that fleece. As you pick the fleece up off of the board, I like to kind of just give it a, not this, but as it's in your arms, kind of give it a bounce shake. You'll lose a lot of those little bits right off the bat. This is where having a proper skirting table is very important. And you want it to have holes that are wide enough to allow those little bits to fall through. And I'm going to say a pet peeve of mine is people throw the fleeces upside down. So they're looking at the cut side up. You absolutely must throw it so that the cut side is down so that those little pieces fall through. This happens a lot. And then I'm sitting there going, none of the second cuts are falling through the thing because they're staying on top. Granted, we all want to look at the pretty side of the fleece. I mean, I'm with you there. But if you do not throw it cut side down, those little bits that kind of get stuck will not fall out. So there, you pull off anything that is short. Again, you can even pull a sample bit and go, okay, this is what I want to put in the bag. And anything that doesn't match up to that gets yanked. The britch wool gets yanked. From the neck up, you usually end up with a worn spot, especially if you feed in certain types of hay feeders. Like, it'll just mat everything on the neck. Just pull the whole neck. It's not worth keeping the neck. Lower legs get pulled. Any remainder of the belly that might not have come off initially, that gets pulled. Anything from around the butt gets pulled. Like, no questions asked. When you are asking a premium price for your fleece, and here's the thing that I have to remind people sometimes. People are like, well, I'm going to stick more in the bag and I'm getting more because it weighs. You can actually charge more per pound selling 5 pounds of really good stuff versus selling 10 pounds with all that mixed in. Nobody wants it. Just get rid of it, mulch with it, do something else with it. But yeah, so proper skirting. I'm going to argue a little bit with you, because most people don't have the extra help there to skirt on the day. But if the fleece is taken off properly and you can roll it properly right off the board, it is very easy to go back later and skirt them. And 90% of your shearers know how to roll a fleece. They're more than happy to show you how to roll a fleece. They don't want to have to do all the rolling of the fleece. So you need to learn this and then run with it. But yes, you do need to skirt. Get down to the good stuff, and people will pay you so much more for it.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Mary Jean's got something to say about this too. She says, have to run to another meeting. Great session. I agree with everything Emily Hickman says about inconsistent staple length. Yarn quality really suffers if not well sorted, and no second cuts. Thank you, Mary Jean.
Yeah. If you're shearing your own sheep, I've seen some people do their own, on a stand, and, they do the kind of, they shear and pull it and shear and pull it and shear and pull it. I'm never going to judge somebody on how they're shearing. As long as the sheep gets sheared, that's what matters. If you're going to shear that way, you just need to make sure that clipper is on the skin. That is usually people's number one fear, is cutting the animal. And the only way to do that is if the clipper's on the skin. But you're actually more likely to cut them if you're floating than if you're in contact with the skin. Because when you're floating, you get brave. And then when you actually run into something, you're usually pushing harder than is necessary. I will also add that there is an air pocket right against the skin. And if you're shearing within the air pocket, it just comes right off. If this is the problem with using risers, you will see them occasionally, or people ask about them frequently. Like, can you put a riser on so that it holds the clipper up above, to leave basically like 2 months of wool on them? And you can buy lifted combs, which are taller. Those things are a nightmare to shear with because you're shearing right into where because the body heat of the animal liquefies the lanolin. Mm-hmm. At a certain point, it will stop and solidify, and you are shearing right into that solidified spot. It is a nightmare. You are better off putting her on the skin and just going, because it is so much easier to shear when you're right within that heated up spot versus right above it, where it is just, it's awful to shear in that spot. I'm going to tell you from experience. It's bad.
Well, it's gummy and it dulls your blades much quicker, right? It slows it down, all of that. Yeah.
I've used a couple lifted combs because out west they like to do that. They like to use a 9 and then they'll use a 9 with lifted, and you are pushing so hard. You're like a 9-tooth comb. It's basically this. You would think that it would go through, but you are right in that gummy spot, and your life sucks that day. Bad.
Let's see. We've got another question from Annette. Brittany, I'm not touching it. Okay. Should full fleeces be put in the bag? What is the ideal weight for sale?
When I'm there shearing for you, Annette, I pull bellies and I chuck them in the corner. So the full fleece is not going in the bag. I am putting them in the bag all in one piece. So theoretically, you can take them back out and they should fall open. In a perfect world, you would skirt them right off the sheep, but you need to have enough people and everything ready to go to do it. Yeah. You also have to have the barn space to do it in case it's raining. That's also a thing. So I go back and forth on that. If you have the people there and you have, people who know what they're doing, because the other thing is you'll end up with people that get real gung-ho and you'll end up with this much wool left because they have thrown everything else under the, doing it when there's a time crunch, it usually ends badly. Yeah. It is best to do it when you can sit down and just pick through it and really look at the fleece. So find a time to do it. Just make sure it goes in the bag in a way that you can dump it back out and it'll spread. So that's the most important part of that, I guess.
Yeah. And as far as an ideal weight for sale, I mean, that's completely going to vary by breed and, how nasty that fleece is.
Yeah. I mean, if your average fleece is like 7 or 8 pounds, I mean, if you're doing a proper skirt, you're at least getting down to 5. Sometimes you're losing about half of that depending on the breed or whatnot. So.
Yeah. Very helpful. Thank you, Emily. All right, Nancy Cox-Starkey. Hi, Nancy. She says, thank you, Emily. And Jean Ludeni said, this was great. I learned a lot. That's what we hope for. We're striving for that. So yay. Kathy Bermania. If we have a fleece with both 4 and 2.5-inch sections, can we separate those and have them processed separately? Good question.
I find this on all the show sheep. The show sheep, they trim the backs, and so you end up with the backs all being like 2 inches, and then the sides are real long. I mean, theoretically, you can, as long as what you're sending in is uniform. If you end up with any degree of longer staple versus shorter, because they have to set the machine to accommodate, the longest staple. So, yeah, in theory, you can separate those. It's just a lot more work, more skirting. But if you have the time and the inclination, yeah, I don't see why that wouldn't work.
And enough of each to send in to make it worth your while. Yeah.
Yeah. That's definitely a thing on show sheet, though, where you end up with like a myriad of lengths because of the way they trim them.
Mm-hmm. All right. Annette says, gotcha, thanks. And she says, my ladies are so much smaller than mine. So maybe not a 7-pound fleece on her sheet.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is all of the questions, unless someone pops something in here in the next moment or two. I think we touched on everything I wanted to touch on. So fabulous. Yay, you. Is there anything else you think folks should know about shearing, hiring a professional shearer, what to look for? Say they're not on the East Coast, they're not in the Mid-Atlantic region where you work. What kind of questions should they be asking?
So if you are looking for a shearer and you need help finding a shearer, there are resources. So the American Sheep Industry has their website. That is our lobbying body for sheep. So they have a website, and if you go onto their website, they do have a shearer directory listed there. There is a thing called certified shearer. That just means you signed a paper. It doesn't mean that you've met any sort of standard of quality. I will point that out. That is not a negative thing. That is just an educational thing. Like, they sign a paper to get on the list. So if you see an ASI certified shearer, that just means they signed something. But their shearing directory does have people listed from most states. If you go on there and you call those people or contact those people and you're not having success, most states do have a state sheep association. So Maryland has the Maryland Sheep Breeders Association. There is a Virginia Sheep Producers Association. There's a North Carolina one. Like, each state has a sheep association. Do a basic Google search, find your sheep association, and send them an email and say, hey, I'm in this area, I'm in this town. Is there a shearer that you would recommend that services this area? That is probably the best place to start in terms of trying to find a shearer. Now, there are some regions of the country, in particular the Southeast, so Florida and Georgia. There's not a lot of wool sheep down there to begin with. I do know of some shearers that pass through the area, but there are a lot more sort of dead zones in that area. Colorado, for some reason, has a lot of dead zones in terms of handling hobby farms. The people that tend to go through there want to do bigger jobs. So Colorado, I usually get a lot of calls from there. But there are shearers operating in all of these areas. So that's where I would start. Check out the ASI site. If the ASI site doesn't give you any success, contact your state sheep association. You can also contact the person you bought your sheep from. Now, if you went to an auction, you can go to that auction and say, who shears in this area? Because, again, these are livestock people, and they usually have those connections. Mm-hmm. Most people are more than happy to share that information. So don't be shy. We've all been there where we're looking for somebody. That's how I got into this. Nobody would come shear my sheep. We ended up hauling them to the neighbors. And then the guy decided he didn't want to shear black sheep. And so here I am as a teenager with nobody to shear my black sheep. So these things changed lives. This trajectory of my life was changed at that point. So somebody will come out and do it. There is usually somebody that will come through the area at some point. Now, it might not line up with when you want to shear, but hopefully there can be a meeting of the minds. I will say this. There are a lot of people that say we shear the first week of March, and that is the only time we can shear. Like, no questions asked. I'm not willing to be flexible. This is when we shear. Again, the number of shearers in America is not really going up. There are shearing schools if you want to learn how to shear. Maryland is having our shearing school this year. Hopefully no more massive COVID outbreaks. There are shearing schools kind of spread out throughout the United States. And there's a really good shearing instructor out of Minnesota who does private classes as well. So, I mean, again, if you want resources, there are definitely resources out there. You can contact me. I'm more than happy to help direct you down the pipeline. But there's really not more shearers out there. The sheep are getting bigger and they're harder to learn on. And the hobbyists are really hard to learn with. So that's the other sort of problem area of learning. So if you do get a beginner, please be understanding. You know, there is not a shearer out there who says, I want to shear because every once in a while I might cut one and that's enjoyable. There is zero enjoyment in cutting them. There is zero enjoyment when things go wrong. If I'm trimming feet and there's blood, there is zero enjoyment with that. Like, Zero. I hate it. I hate it. It's an emotional thing for me. And it's an emotional thing for every shearer. There is shame involved. And as a shearer, you have to learn how to process it quickly and move past it. It seems a little cold, but it's just the nature of the job. Like you cannot internalize all of it. You just know that that's probably going to happen. And you're doing everything you can to get better and avoid these things. So if something should happen at your job, you know, there are proper questions to ask about how to avoid it in the future. Sometimes you might not be using the right gear for the right breed. You know, when you're running in merinos and they're wrinkly, if you're raising merinos and I'm gonna say delusional enough to assume that they will never get cut, you probably should not have merinos. They are a nightmare to shear because skin just jumps out at you. Even the best guys are going to bark them up just a little bit. But again, nobody gets any kind of pleasure from that. So just be understanding, especially now when like everything is just so much more, you know, emotions are so much more and everybody is anxious. Please be forgiving. We're really trying to get more learners out there. So if people are interested in learning, actually ASI has a program right now where they are trying to make it sweeten the pot essentially. So they'll pay a mentor to take on an apprentice. So there are programs out there right now, which, you know, people can, you know, tap into. So we are always happy to try to teach people. But with that comes the requirement that you be flexible schedule wise, because, you know, shearers shear. Once you learn how to shear, there will be an unlimited demand for you. Like you just need to set your old life aside. You are a shearer now. You are at people's beck and call all spring. So there's that as well. But yeah, just be forgiving. Contact your shearer very early, especially if you have very narrow windows that you are, you know, really aiming towards. And you know, don't work yourself into such a corner that you can't adapt. Should your guy not be able to be there on the second Saturday of April every year, please be flexible. There's a reason, you know, it's just the nature of this job. People change their lambing dates. You know, you try to connect jobs together, you know, with gas prices the way they are. Like this year, I'm being really tough about trying to not drive, you know, 6 hours away more than once a month. Like that's kind of where we're at. And I feel like that's a reasonable request. And I have some people that are giving me pushback, but, you know, try to be understanding. There's a lot of little pieces to the puzzle that we try to put together. And I want everybody to be happy. But don't have your paradigm so specific and so unmovable that you can't adapt a little bit one way or the other. I'll be honest. I am a maniac about pre-lamb shearing. It is easier. It is cleaner. It is quieter. There are so many reasons to do it. But even that, like this year, wool prices commercially are nothing. 5 cents a pound. I've been doing this 20 years. Back when I started, it was hovering around 60 cents a pound for medium grade wool. So that was kind of, you know, people complained about that. There was a time period where it was over $1 a pound. It was hovering at 60. People would grumble. I remember the highest it ever was in my, you know, career. It got up to like 83 cents a pound one year, which was like awesome. Like we were raking in the money. We didn't know it then, but we were raking in the money. And then it has slowly crawled down. It got to 30 cents. It was hovering around 30 cents for several years. Then it kind of dropped to 20 cents. And then the Chinese trade agreement stuff eliminated our Chinese markets, which is where most of the East Coast wool went. It's where most of the medium grade wools went. It's where most of the coarse grade wools went that are going commercial. Again, I'm going to emphasize this is commercial. Now they're storing it. So there's a stockpile building up. And it's worth 5 cents a pound. They don't want anything that could be hair contaminated. They don't want anything with color. They don't want anything long wool. They really don't want long wool at this point. So if you know more local mills that would absorb some of that stuff, let's, you know, work your connections, But this is where Shave 'em to Save 'em is enormous, because you have an opportunity. If you're getting more than 5 cents a pound, you are raking it in. So like, don't burn your bridges with your buyers. Make sure what you're selling is worthy of the price you're selling it for. And there are people that are happy to help. In my opinion, if you're hitting at $1 a pound, you are breaking even. So anything over $1 a pound, is money in the bank. If you're putting the time in to really skirt that, and you're taking, half hour, an hour on each fleece to really make sure that what's going in the bag is uniform, you can charge for that, and people will appreciate the time you've put into it. But you got to put that time in. Otherwise, you're going to burn some bridges and you won't be able to sell it anymore. And then it's worth 5 cents. And then you're here with all of us and throwing it out. So, really, keep that in mind. I don't foresee the price going up here anytime soon. I hate to be negative about it, but again, we have a stockpile that's built up. So it's going to take some time to work that out. But shearers appreciate different wools. Like, I love it. And I love taking off hand spinner fleeces. And that is a passion. And it's not just me. There's a lot of shearers out there. There's a reason we got into it. We love sheep. We love hard work. And ultimately, we love the product. So, be gentle on your shearers. Like, deep down, we have very tender hearts. And we just want to do a good job. And I'll tell you, like, every once in a while, you get a job that goes wrong. And it wrecks you. As a shearer, it wrecks you emotionally. And I can say it out loud. A lot of the guy shearers are never going to say that out loud, but it does wreck you. Like, you feel like crap for weeks if things go wrong on a job. So, I get a lot of phone calls and emails and texts during the spring, oh, the shearer was here. He did a terrible job. Everything went wrong. He was cutting them up. And I'm going to tell you, he was doing the best job he could. And usually after about 3 questions, I can figure out what you did wrong to not prepare your sheep correctly. Typically, it's either you sheared too close to lambing, like fresh lambs on the ground. You sheared into the rise, which meant they were trying to shed and, they were stressed. And then they weren't caught very full. Like, typically you can check those boxes and instantly it's like, okay, I wouldn't have sheared them that time frame. If you would shear them at a better time frame, this guy would probably do a fantastic job, or at least a much better job than he did. So, like, please be gentle. You see a lot of negative Facebook posts. Oh, this shearer is just an abuser. Like, none of us do this because that's what we want to do. Like, I just want to hammer that home. Please be kind. Please be kind. Like, you go on the sheep forum things and you see, it's usually about once every other week, you'll see a negative shearer post. Like, don't use this guy. He's terrible. Yeah. Like, we're all just doing the best we can. Like, can we try to work through some things that will make it better next year?
Yeah.
That's should be going.
And that's why we invited you on, Emily, because, if the prep is right, shearing is going to go so much better.
Time correctly, empty them out, and talk to your shearer. If your shearer makes a comment, or suggestion, really take it to heart. Like, do it. Like, I get a lot of pushback on the food thing. Like, people just fight me. So I tend to hedge low and I say 12 hours. Honestly, if your sheep weigh more than me, I really want you in that 18 to 20 hour. There's nuance to all of this. And most of us, we're happy to talk it through about your flock in particular. Because, again, every flock is different. Here in the East Coast, everybody has their own breed. So every breed is different. Like, there's nuance to it. And I'm happy to share that with you and educate on that. Because, again, I want all the shearers to succeed. I want myself to succeed. And we want it because we want what's best for the animal. And as a side result, like, my job is easier. Like, my body will last longer if you follow these rules. I could do this longer. I like doing it, so don't hurt me.
And benefit for those of you watching, you'll get more money for your fleece.
Yeah. Yes.
That's what it's about for you. Yeah. Emily, thank you so much.
Oh, no problem. This has been such a pleasure.
We have a few other thank yous and Let's see. Someone said, thank you. I learned a lot. I don't have sheep, but I have more of an understanding of what it would take. That's fabulous. And we also got a thank you. This is great. Super helpful. So yeah, thank you so much for everybody watching today. We appreciate you taking a little time out of your day to share with us and to learn more. If you are a shepherd or a fiber artist, I hope that this was super helpful to you and a little bit entertaining too. Emily is always a joy to listen to. She's full of antics and great humor, and we appreciate you so much, Emily. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you so much. And if anybody has questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to help.
Yep. And we will, remember, if you want to catch up or rewind this or watch it again, you can find it if you lose it in the Facebook page, because it will eventually get buried. Go to our YouTube channel. Brittany, I don't know if that's something you can throw up there real quick, but Brittany puts
just go to Livestock Conservancy. It's in the footer.
perfect.
You can find our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram. All of these things are there. If you want to get in contact with Emily, her shearing website is chamelin-shearing.org.
Yep. And
on Instagram, it's at sheargrazing. If you're looking for the farm website, that's AERIE farmeast.com. And if you're not already a fiber artist or fiber provider, just go to rarewool.org and learn more about the Shave 'em to Save 'em program and how you can do all these fun things.
And if you love this programming and you want to support the Livestock Conservancy so you can continue to see more of these programs, including our monthly sheep chats, you can sign up as a member or become a donor at livestockconservancy.org. All right, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh, and we'll see you next month. Mary Jean Parker will be coming back for a nice talk about working with your fiber mill. Perfect follow up for this one today. All right, we'll see you next month. Take care. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye.